Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Ethereum, but more specifically, we're going to discuss the Ether Bitcoin valuation. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation is obviously something that we talk about quite a bit around here, but with the most recent close on the weekly time frame behind us, I thought it would be timely to provide an update. So, my general thesis here is that the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation should continue to slowly bleed. Now, this has been my thesis for a long time. However, I will remind people that really, ever since December of 2021, the Ether Bitcoin valuation has just been putting in one lower high after another. And I do think of this as a somewhat inconvenient truth for many to want to accept. And you can see, what once was holding support at the 20-week SMA and the 21-week EMA, we're now finding resistance at those same levels. So the argument is that as we continue to push forward into this year, the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation should continue to fade. In fact, one of the things we've talked about before is that once you get past May, historically, Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation does not give great returns on average. Now, sometimes I mean that devaluation, of course, starts before May, and in fact, in 2022, it started in May, right? I mean, and we went down 15, 16%, followed by another 11 to 12% in June. So it's not to say that you have to wait until June to see negative returns on the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation. We've already had January and March showing negative returns on the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation. But the point is that the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, in my opinion, at these levels is on borrowed time. Okay, I mean, I don't think that we will be spending much more time at these valuations for the Ethereum Bitcoin pair. Could it continue to hold for a little bit? Anything's possible, right? I mean, it's held for 2 years now. In fact, coincidentally, when we first came up into this range was almost exactly 2 years ago. When we hit the top of this range was actually, or when we really came into this range, it was on the week of May 10th. And the week of May 10th is only 2 or 3 weeks away, so it's really not even that far away. Sort of mark the 2 year anniversary of the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation really rocketing up into this range. And by the way, we were calling for this, Ethereum move as we went into sort of Q1, and Q2 of 2021. This is something that we very much anticipated. And now, once again, I think that rather than expecting it to the upside, we're more likely to see it come back to the downside. Okay. Another way to visualize the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation is to perhaps look at the Heikin-Ashi candles on a monthly time frame. Okay. This is a somewhat compelling way to view this. And you can actually kind of see a very similar pattern here when you compare the cycles. Let's call this one, this is one where you first have your first rally up. So that might correspond to this phase right here. So 1 and 1. And then you have sort of your second rally up, which gets you into your distribution phase. We'll call that 2. And then so this one will be 2. And then you have sort of your secondary distribution phase, which is ultimately at a lower high, which we'll say is 3. And that is 3 over here as well. And what you'll see, though, is that, after the first move up, it was sort of like this was a trap, right? A trap to make people think it was going to go back down. But in reality, what happened, right? We went into Ethuary, right? Or Ethuary, depending on what you want to call it, back in January 2021, which we were quite bullish on Ethereum back then. Then you get into your first distribution phase, and then, of course, comes the second distribution phase. And then, you kind of hang on for a little bit in this range. But then what eventually happens is it fades back out. Now, something else I'd like to draw your attention to is that the next, back over here anyways, if you want to compare sort of this here with this here, right? If you want to compare these two things, Note that it was on this move down that marked the bottom for ETH USD back in the last cycle, right? It was sort of the second move to the lower part of this range. You might say, well, what about this part? This part over here was actually achieved on a Bitcoin USD rally, not a Bitcoin USD dump. So if you follow this channel for a while, you'll know I'm very bullish on the Bitcoin dominance for many, many reasons that I've outlined. And I know a lot of people, if you've only watched this channel for the last year, you might assume that I just am. You might assume that I'm not ever bullish on Ethereum. But again, just go look at the videos on my channel back in 2019, 2020, and even 2021, and I was quite bullish on Ethereum and even the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation. But I think as an investor, we owe it to ourselves to be able to flip, what direction we think it's going, right? Nothing goes straight up forever. Nothing goes straight down forever. And I'm still in the camp that I think you're likely going to see the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation sort of fall back in at the very least, or so, right around that 0.03 to 0.04 range, right? So I think that is sort of the general idea for Ethereum as we head into the next few months, and perhaps it could always take longer to get there, right? I mean, you can see once we bounced here back down to sort of this range low, we actually hung around there for about half a year before actually going to the true bottom on the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation. So I think that's something that we need to consider as well, is that it doesn't necessarily have to occur immediately, although it doesn't. I mean, it certainly doesn't mean it can't, right? I mean, we have spent a lot more time up here. It hasn't been as long as some people might think compared to where it was what we did last cycle. Like if you say that this was the move into sort of the into the range, like let's take it from up here, you can see that we did actually spend over a year in that range. Now, of course, now it's gone on for a bit longer, but also note that Bitcoin USD and even ETH USD spent a lot longer at the highs than it did back in 2017. So that might help explain why this has taken a lot longer than what we've previously seen. And I mean, you can see that even over here in 2018, right, in April and May, the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation was green. In 2019, you will see that it was February that was green, March, April were slightly red. But again, what happens once you got beyond May is that the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation just kind of bled profusely down to sort of new levels. And even here, right? I mean, the May was sort of this local top right here, and then the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation just bled until the end of the year. This over here, right? This was a local top in March, and then another one in May, and then after that, it just sort of bled until the end of the year. And I mean, you can find plenty of similarities between all of these different moves, and even last year, you can see that it started bleeding here in May and June. And I do think that you're likely going to see it fall back in as we get out further into the year and potentially come into this area by sometime in the next like 6 to 8 months or so, down at the 0.03 to 0.04 range. I mean, hopefully it doesn't take that long, right? I hope it doesn't take that long, but it certainly could, right? Anything's possible. So that's something to consider. And of course, when you think about the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation dropping, you have to wonder like, well, why is it dropping? Is it dropping because Bitcoin USD is going up, or is it dropping because Bitcoin USD is going down? And the argument is that it's going to drop either way, right? Is why I think these valuations are so compelling for me to look at, is that if you believe that Ether Bitcoin will drop regardless of whether Bitcoin USD goes up or down, then it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, like it makes it so that everything else at this phase of the cycle beyond Bitcoin is likely bleeding back to Bitcoin, is likely too risky compared to Bitcoin, and the purchasing power of basically everything else with respect to Bitcoin is likely in a downtrend. I'm guessing until at least the third quarter of this year. Now, listen, I mean, I know when I put out these videos, whatever happens the very next day, you might have a reaction to that. And if Ethereum Bitcoin valuation goes back up tomorrow or something, it doesn't negate the thesis, right? I mean, it seems like to me, and I'm not really sure why this continues to sort of be a thing that I have to address, but I mean, if you look at these things, I mean, it seems like every time that it rallies, right? Every single time that we've seen Ether, Bitcoin rally back up. I mean, I feel like a lot of people get really really excited about that idea, but then what ends up happening, right? It just ends up being another lower high. I mean, and even this rally here took you sort of back up, but it did not make it back to where it fell down from, right? So like it fell down here, rallied back up, but it was a lower high. And essentially every single time it ends up being a lower high. And on each lower high, sort of the gotcha moments come out, right? Like of, oh, been bearish on the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, but look at this move, right? It's rallying back up. But then again, I would say, well, take a step back and what really has the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation achieved? Nothing, right? I mean, it's just putting in lower highs, and it recently even put in a lower low as compared to sort of October of 2022, right? It recently put in a lower low. So again, I say, what has it achieved? It's just a series of lower highs. I think it's an inconvenient truth that a lot of people don't want to accept. But I think that the likely direction will remain down. Okay? You might say, well, what's an invalidation? I mean, look, if the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation can start putting in higher highs on a sustained basis, then you at least have a case to be made. But what case can you make when the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation has just been putting in lower highs since September and really lower highs since December of 2021, right? I mean, it's just one lower high after another, and every single time it rallies, the excitement's there, and when I see the comments, I see the tweets, I would just say, how is it any different than every lower high that we've previously seen? And why should we expect it to not resolve in the same way, which would ultimately just be to eventually come back in and to continue to push back down? That's my general idea on the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation. I think it is going down for most of this year. I mean, notwithstanding occasional pumps back up to the upside. Remember, nothing goes down monotonically, just like nothing goes up monotonically. Well, maybe the government debt goes up monotonically, but most things don't go down or up in a straight line, right? It's a stochastic process, and the stochastic process is an important component of it because the market has to constantly make you think that you're missing out on something, right? Like if it just went straight down, then it would be super easy for everyone to just ride that trend. But by doing it like this, it constantly makes everyone think that they're about to miss out on a crazy move, when in reality, it's just sort of sucking in more liquidity before ultimately going back down. This is going to continue to be a tailwind for the Bitcoin dominance for months and months to come, and then maybe by the end of this year, we'll finally get a more reasonable valuation on Ethereum with respect to Bitcoin. And then at that point, I might think to myself, all right, it's worth the risk. But at these valuations on Bitcoin and at this phase of the cycle, I think it's not worth it. And remember too, Ethereum's valuation against Bitcoin last time didn't even bottom until September of 2019. And then it kind of put in a double bottom in January of 2020. I mean, if you think about it like as a cyclical behavior, right? 4 years ago, this was still putting in basically a double bottom in January of 2020, which I mean, that would correspond to like January of 2024, right? I mean, like this was Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation was still pushing lower. So I still think cyclically there's a lot of headwinds for the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation. As we sort of talked about on the Ethereum Bitcoin monthly returns table, and I think too, if you sort of look at the monthly Heikin-Ashi candles on the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, there's a fairly compelling case to be made that again, this is just a secondary distribution phase, not that dissimilar from what we saw last cycle, not that dissimilar from what we saw from Bitcoin USD in 2021, even down to some of sort of the these last moves, right? Sort of your 1-2 punch, as I previously outlined. If you look at if you look at Bitcoin USD in 2021, you sort of had the same thing, right? Like in the end of the year, right? You sort of had your 1-2 punch, right? 1, 2 on the secondary distribution phase, right? So the first distribution phase was sort of 4 moves, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. This one was just 1, 2. Ether, Bitcoin, right? Same thing, right? Like you sort of had this longer distribution phase right here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. But then this one was just sort of this 1-2 punch, followed by a series of lower highs, just like Bitcoin USD, right? And Bitcoin USD eventually made it back down to this level here, but then eventually it fell below that, right? So I think Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation will eventually make it back to this level, right? But then I think eventually it's going to even fall below that. So I wish it was a more, more positive way to look at it, but we have to remain objective. We have to say, like, this is the trend. This is the likely direction it's going. It's nothing against Ethereum. I think Ethereum is a great project long term, but it still is, right now, in my opinion, going down against Bitcoin. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Links in the description below. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.